Welcome to Part 2 of training. Part 2 covers the designated supports. The next few slides will present the available designated supports that can be used by any student, regardless of program status. That means that these supports are available to any not identified students, as well as students receiving special education, 504, or ELL services. There are 4 designated supports that have only one eligibility criteria and are available to any student. The single eligibility criteria is that they must routinely and effectively use the accommodation during classroom instruction and testing. Those designated supports are having a Braille test booklet, basic transcribing, individualized structured reminders, and manipulating test materials. In the past, dictionaries were considered a designated support for students in grades 3 through 5 on the reading test and in grade 4 on the writing test. Beginning in 2018, dictionaries will no longer be a designated support. The STAR dictionary policy has been amended to include access to a dictionary as part of the test administration procedures for students in grades 3 through 5 on the reading and writing test. Photocopying is no longer a designated support but has been included with other policy documents. The designated support of individualized structured reminders is intended to support students who have difficulty maintaining attention to tasks more frequently than the average student. It can be used on any STAR or STAR Spanish test, regardless of the subject or grade level, as well as TELPAS. Examples include using paper clips or sticky notes to pace movement through the test booklet, using a personal timer or clock, using index cards with handwritten or color-coded reminders, or using strategies that are already outlined in a student's behavior plan. Basic transcribing is a designated support that requires the test administrator to transfer student responses onto the answer document or into the online system because the student is unable to do so independently. Eligible state assessments are STAR, STAR Spanish, and TELPAS. The student needs to be able to write or circle their answers in the test booklet, point to responses in the test booklet, dictate or sign responses, write responses on another workspace, use speech-to-text software to indicate responses so that the test administrator can transcribe. Basic transcribing is also available to students in emergency or unpredicted situations, such as when a student breaks their arm. In these situations, the requirement of using the accommodation routinely and effectively does not need to be met. There are 5 designated supports that have multiple eligibility criteria but are available to any student, including non-identified students. Those designated supports are having a large print test booklet, extra time on the same school day, oral or signed administration, math manipulatives, and supplemental aids. In 2017, supplemental aids were only available to students that had an LPAC 504 committee or ARD committee making their accommodation decision. Beginning in 2018, RTI committees will also be able to identify students that need to use supplemental aids on state assessments if those aids are routinely and effectively being used during classroom instruction. Supplemental aids are paper-based resources students can use to assist in the recalling of information. Supplemental aids can be used on STAR or STAR Spanish assessments. Allowable supplemental aids are described on the supplemental aid policy available on the TEA website and in a quick look document on the Lead Forward Resources webpage under the Accessibility tab. Many supplemental aids have already been approved for use in Humble ISD. Those are located on the District Common. Teachers should look at the ones already approved for use before developing a new one. If a teacher needs to develop a new supplemental aid, these are the steps which need to be followed. Any new approved supplemental aids will be added to the District Common. The designated support of extra time on the same day of testing is available to students who have a proven need which inhibits them from completing the assessment in the allotted time period. Students that are identified as an ELL, are visually impaired, dyslexic, have evidence of reading difficulty, require frequent or lengthy breaks during testing, or are autistic may be provided extra time. Extra time is available on STAR and STAR Spanish assessments. Students receiving extra time should begin testing at the beginning of the school day and may test until the end of the regular school day. If a campus is planning to have multiple test sessions during the school day, students with extra time should be assigned to begin testing in the session that begins closest to the start of the school day. Oral or signed administration of an assessment is available to students who are English language learners, dyslexic, or have a documented evidence of a reading difficulty. This designated support is appropriate for students who have difficulty with reading to the extent that it prevents them from showing mastery of certain skills. It is available on STAR and STAR Spanish. However, depending on the subject area being tested, only certain test features may be read aloud to the students. There is a difference in what can be read orally by a test administrator for a paper test and what is read by the text-to-speech function for an online test. The appropriate team of people determining an oral administration will not specify the mode of testing. The committee will only determine that the student is or is not eligible for an oral administration. For the math, science, and social studies test, questions and reference material may be read aloud by the test administrator. In addition, on the online test, embedded supports may be read aloud. On reading assessments, or for the reading section of the English 1 and English 2 assessments, the questions, answer choices, and embedded supports are read aloud by the computer, while the test administrator reads aloud the reference materials and accommodations. The reading passages themselves will not be read by the computer and may not be read by the test administrator. On the paper test only, the questions and required reference materials and accommodations may be read by the test administrator. For the writing section of the English 1 and English 2 assessments or the grade 4 or 7 writing test, revising passages, revising questions, and embedded supports are read aloud by the computer. The test administrator will need to read any reference materials or accommodations. The editing passages and editing questions may not be read aloud by the test administrator and will not be read by the computer. On the paper test, only required reference materials and accommodations may be read by the test administrator. The ARD or 504 committee will no longer determine the mode of testing, such as paper or online. The only options which will be available in eSped are read all eligible text, student can change level of support, or read all eligible text, student cannot change level of support, or read upon student request. If the committee chooses to read all eligible text, the student will take a paper test. However, if the committee chooses read upon request, the mode of testing could be paper or online as text-to-speech. This next designated support, which is content and language support, is only available to special education, 504 or ELL students, and it has multiple eligibility criteria. In 2017, content supports and language and vocabulary supports were separate, designated supports available only to students testing online. Beginning in 2018, these two supports will be combined into one designated support. However, they will continue to be available only in the online environment. The designated support of content and language support is intended to assist students that need help understanding tested content, selections, test questions, and answer choices in a different way. Through pop-ups and rollovers, directions will be scaffolded, students will be assisted with tracking, and visual aids and various graphic organizers will be presented. Additionally, language will be simplified. The sentence structure will be simpler, and graphic representations of vocabulary and concepts will be provided. These features are available on any subject area test for any grade level only in the online environment. Students that will be testing online with content and vocabulary support should routinely and effectively use similar strategies and materials in the classroom that simulate what is presented in pop-ups and rollovers in the online environment. Prior to taking the STAR online assessment, students and teachers should become familiar with the embedded supports and various tools that are provided in the online test. There are several resources that can be accessed on the TEA website, including the STAR online tutorials and release tests. There are two designated supports available to only special education or 504 students, with each having multiple eligibility criteria. They are calculation aids and spelling assistance. In 2017, in order for an 8th grade student to use a calculator on the grade 8 science assessment, it had to be assigned to them as a designated support. For 2018, calculators for the grade 8 science test will no longer be a designated support, but must be made available to all students as part of the updated calculator policy for 2018 STAR assessments. Use of a calculation aid as a designated support is intended to provide an alternate method for completing calculations for special education or 504 students taking STAR or STAR Spanish on the grades 3 through 7 math assessment and grade 5 science. For students in grades 3 or 4 to qualify for a calculation aid, they must have a physical disability that prevents them from independently writing numbers required for computations, or a visual impairment that prevents them from seeing the numbers they have written during computation. For grades 5 through 8, they also qualify if they have a disability that affects math calculations. A disability that affects math calculations is a problem adding, subtracting, multiplying, and/or dividing using paper and pencil that can be caused by various reasons, including, but not limited to, a learning disability in math calculation, ADD, ADHD, behavior or emotional problem, or a processing or memory issue. Students should routinely and effectively use a calculation aid during classroom instruction and on classroom assessments in order to have the aid on state assessments. The use of calculation aids as a designated support on STAR should not replace the teaching of basic computation skills as outlined in the TEKS. Use of spelling assistance as a designated support is intended to provide help on the STAR 4-7 writing, English EOCs, and TELPAS assessment for special education or 504 students. The student must be capable of organizing and developing ideas and understands the basic function and use of written language, but has a disability that is so severe that he or she can't apply basic spelling rules or word patterns. CoWriter is an example of software which can be used for spelling assistance. Spelling Assistance is a new online embedded support. When students are typing written responses, if the word he or she typed appears with a red underline, students can click to see other spelling suggestions. It works similar to a word processing program. There are 4 designated supports that require TEA approval. These supports are Complex Transcribing, Extra Day, Mathematics Scribe, and Other. In the event one of these designated supports is needed for a student, please contact the District Assessment Office for guidance with the accommodation request process. Special education and 504 students will have STAR assessment decisions documented in eSped. In eSped, accommodations must be selected by using the check boxes on the accommodation page. LEP students will have assessment decisions documented in Elevation. All accommodation information is being uploaded into Test Towns, which is a program many campus testing coordinators use in Umbella ISD to organize state assessments. Accommodation information listed in a text box will not link in Test Towns. Additional resources about accessibility features and designated supports can be found online from the Lead Forward Resources page and the Accommodations Resources page on the TEA website. If you have questions concerning accommodations, please contact the Student Assessment Office. It takes a team to make the appropriate assessment decisions for students, so thank you for taking the time to complete this training.